Hi, this is Catherine Henry, and welcome back. Thank you so much for watching. Today, I wanted to share with you a couple of ideas about why we're talking so much about XR and why you should care. So, I created a presentation that will show you how XR is really the key for us to all get back to business and how it can potentially even future proof your career. So I'm going to share with you a presentation that I have developed, and I hope you find this useful. I thought it'd be worthwhile to demystify what we mean when we talk about XR technologies, what they are exactly, and again, how they can be used for us to bridge the gap that we're facing now in this, as I said, contact-free economy. So starting off, what are some of the issues that we're facing today? Obviously, human resources is a major challenge because on the one hand, we've got the pressures to survive, if not be profitable, by businesses. And then the other side is that we've got so many people who are contract workers working at least 30, 40, even 50% of some workforces, even of FTSE and Fortune 500 companies. Because after the last Great Recession, the idea was by having a flexible workforce, you would be able to scale up and scale down as needed. But the consequences are starting to become evident. And we're seeing a lot of pressure on companies to provide higher wages, more benefits, more security. And on the other hand, businesses are really concerned about how they're going to survive when doors are effectively closed. Distance, people are working from a distance, and things are generally very, very difficult. We're also facing a lot of communication and collaboration issues. Everyone's on Zoom, everyone's having calls all the time. No one really knows how to even log on to these things. People are really confused about that. And we're all struggling with getting new technology with zero help. So that's very difficult. And it doesn't help that maintenance and repair is impossible now. I mean, whether or not you're working from a plant or a factory, or you're working from home and you need IT support, none of those things can happen. Similarly, utilities, cable and other household or even um, commercial support just isn't there. So we're looking at a completely different way of servicing, providing services, and how can we do that at a distance? And finally, operations, everything from the upstream production, manufacturing, and agricultural activities to downstream retail and customer service. All of that's gone. All of it's been put on hold. So these are significant challenges that we are facing today collectively. So if I could sum it up, it's really a question of profitability, safety, and survival for the companies and for businesses. But what do we do when humanity itself is the problem? The good news is we have a wealth of tools at our disposal that are already created to do this. In fact, Andrew Yang opined recently that we're trying to fit 10 years of productivity in and leaping forward with innovation in a mere 10 weeks. And that's effectively what we're doing. We're all working around the clock. I have produced not only this presentation, but a white paper on creating virtualization strategies, a map that shows you how that these technologies can be used across the different the different sorry different sectors, from oil and gas to agriculture to manufacturing, retail, you name it. So I've mapped them out, and I've mapped out which different technologies can be used to help create efficiencies for businesses. And so, but this is just a quick overview, and if you have real questions about your specific sector or your business, please feel free to email me. But to give you the big picture, its virtualization tools are a big range. They're AI, they're robotics, they're chatbots, interactive and immersive entertainment, which also brings a new form of communications, including XR marketing, virtual reality. So there's a whole wealth of tools out there. The question is, how do you use them? So we've got all these new resources, and so those include technology, media, and platforms. And so if we're looking at specific technology, there are a wealth of technologies, and we're going to address some of those in our different in the different sessions that I'm holding every Wednesday at 3 p.m. with experts from across the world to share with us their insights in their fields of expertise, whether it's VR or AR or, contact-free delivery. One of the things that I think you'll find is that many people are focusing now on virtual reality, and there's a reason for that. It's because it really bridges the most obvious gap that we're seeing so far, and that is that people are struggling communicating, and s- being working from a distance is difficult, and so therefore it gives a sense of presence unlike any other media. It's not as restricted as this flat 2D relationship, but instead we can have multiple media across the screen as if it were a big dashboard. And so there are ways to communicate much more effectively, and those tools are at our disposal today. We also have a number of emerging platforms. So much like the dawn of YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Netflix, we are going to have new tools, new platforms where we can meet. So whether it's a VR platform like Engage or another one, we've had a couple of mergers and acquisitions recently. So I expect that we're going to see some real progress there. We're going to see a number of different ways of using these platforms. And of course, depending on the media you use, there will be different techniques. I studied virtual reality at New York Film Academy, and this is 10 years after doing my MBA. And it was really fascinating because learning how to use marketing within this new media was mind-blowing. So forget digital and everything you've seen before. We're now in a virtual world that has new rules. And so that's the fascinating part. And the good news is that if you're looking to upskill, there are lots of ways to raise your level of play, because so many people are still at the very beginning of this great new economy and really getting to grips with the new reality. So there's still plenty of space for new entrants. So let's start with talking about the XR market. It is tremendous. It's $209 billion globally, according to Research and Markets. And it is the value of that industry is $20 billion just for the VR and AR infrastructure and software and services alone. So it's a tremendous industry, and it's been growing very quickly. 77% compounded annual growth rates, according to IDC. And that is going to be much quicker because we're going to see the adaptation really, really increase dramatically over the next few months and years, because we've identified the gaps, and so many companies are realizing that they have not addressed these in too long a time, and it's time to take the great leap forward. So let's look at some ways that you can do that. Use cases. Gaming is obvious, but what's interesting is that, at least I found it fascinating, that VR has been used for healthcare and medical rehabilitation since the 1980s. So that makes over 40 years that people have been using VR. And why? It's because it has a deep psychological impact, so much so that multiple tests have proven that the coordination comes back more easily because it rewires the way the brain functions. The brain has difficulty understanding where the body ends and the experience begins. It doesn't distinguish the two because a sense of presence. And so this realism makes it much easier to absorb new information and to retain that information. In fact, that's one of the reasons why it's also been used very widely in education. So we've seen this a number of different studies. One I love in particular, it's by a foundation in Miami, and they measured the retention rates of children who were taught in VR against those who were taught by traditional methods 1 year later. And it showed that those who were learning by traditional methods 1 year later retained 20% versus those who studied in VR, who retained a full 80% retention rate of the original material. So I think that's tremendous. And there are multiple case studies that show that there's a significant gap between the traditional methodology of tutoring and VR. So I think it's going to be very, very helpful, particularly as we are going to continue to experience social distancing, unfortunately, very likely for the next few years on and off. So manufacturing and automotive, we've seen much more mixed reality. I would say augmented reality plays a really strong part, whether it's oil and gas or manufacturing, automotive, AEC as well. And There are platforms that will allow one to work not just in VR, but also use the PC or access the content across different devices. And so I think we're going to see a lot of emergence of these hybrid devices over the years to come. But for now, VR is really coming out strongly, and it's ready for play. So again, healthcare medical devices to soar. We're seeing a lot of use cases on the front lines around the world. There are multiple competitions ongoing for assistance now, and multiple companies are stepping up to that call. So I'm very excited to see that development. So as we were talking about the new platforms, we're also going to need new content, and we're going to need to find out or to unravel the mysteries of how to market that content. And it's fascinating because the rules are completely different. So like I said, forget about anything you heard about digital. This is now a virtual reality. This new reality is all about virtualization. All the information that we have in the real world, we're going to have to bring into 3D world. So it's like before websites. Before websites existed, for those of you who remember, you had to take a lot of paper, the annual reports and everything, and upload it onto the web, onto the network. So now, as a result, you get a lot of websites that look effectively like a stack of paper. You have to go through the tabs and find different information. And then eventually they added rich media. Well, that's all very exciting, but it's still flat. It doesn't assimilate the real world. And similar to the way we then had to develop apps, people thought, well, it has to look and feel the same thing as the website. It doesn't. It's a completely different media. And that's the same as the new media that we're going to see today. New platforms, new technologies, new rules. So how do you market in VR? How do you even think about using this 360 space? As a filmmaker who studied specifically VR or VR filmmaking, I can tell you that it's not obvious, and there is an art to it, to doing it well. And the same thing with augmented reality. Gamification, we can learn a great deal about that. And I've invited Kim-Lee Pontin to talk to us about that. We've got a number of different special guests who will be joining my program on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. on my LinkedIn channel. Please check it out, because I think that will add some richer depth and color to the conversations that we're having. But I wanted to give you an overview of exactly what we're talking about so that you can learn as we do and stay abreast of developments in this very fast-moving market. One thing I can say is that we're in an era of post-maximalism, which means that, people just are sick of seeing the excessiveness of social media of the past few years. Now, it's gotten down a rabbit hole of reality TV that is very aggressive and very materialistic. And I would say that now people are kind of over it. Recent comments in the media, I was looking at Olivia Palermo's website the other day, or Harper's Bazaar. They were saying, listen, how can you try to sell outfits, $2,000 outfits in a time like this? And to Harper's Bazaar, they had a picture of Gwyneth Paltrow in a power suit looking down, and they said, you can apologize to her now. People are over it. They've had it. If they didn't respond well. Conversely, they have been very, very sensitive to the attempts by in the public trying to convey information or trying to entertain people. Jimmy Fallon, for example, here in the U.S. has done a great job of doing his show live from home with a handheld camera, and the response has been very positive. People thought this was much more real and attainable and natural, and they responded to it much better. So there is going to be an inflection point in terms of the content. And finally, I would say that virtual reality has been called it's been called a very emotionally powerful tool because of its ability to move people. There's a famous film by Chris Milk. It's called Clouds Over Sidra, which, when shown at a UN charitable event, raised over $2 million over the asking amount, or at least their target amount, because it was so moving. And so people feel that this is one of the best ways of telling a story. And so it's going to be a very powerful tool across markets generally. So again, when we look at these new platforms and new tools, we also have new icons. So again, out with the old, in with the new. Think about the influencers of YouTube or Instagram. They started early on those platforms. And the images that you see here were taken at CES by Samsung earlier in the year, and they are about their neons. They're effectively chatbots who are not human. They are 3D replicas, human replicas, who are brand ambassadors. They can be educators, they can be newscasters, they can be actors, they can be anything you like. But bear in mind, we're not going to have the same standards of news, the typical Fox newscaster. I don't think people are going to want that in the new world. Initially, of course, in VR platforms, we are going to see a demand for highly realistic content, and that exists. And we're going to have content designers design that, and people who design assets, including clothes, all of that in this second world, this parallel universe that we're all going to inhabit. And so naturally, we have brand ambassadors for that. Now, when this debuted by Samsung in January, it seemed completely bizarre and new, but it is nevertheless a reality. And they are licensing these brand ambassadors who can be fed with AI, so natural learning and adaptive learning, as well as pre-scripted or with live interactions. So the way that I'm speaking in the headphone, you would see this avatar move and talk. I did a presentation at the ANA with a group called Mimic, who actually worked with the film Avatar, and it is tremendous to see this thing live. So I believe that this is something that we can easily expect to see towards the end of the year, and it's something you really want to think about in terms of what sort of language do they, well, they can speak multiple languages, but how do they use language? What's their physicality like? What do they look like? Are you going to have multiple, or are you going to have one? And the same thing about your own avatars. I mean, to mimic your corporate style, are you going to stay with highly realistic avatars, or can we expect the creative department to turn up, looking like unicorns or rock stars or I don't know, centaurs, you name it. So they might turn up and cosplay at your next meeting. You just don't know. But I do feel that it's going to eventually evolve to be something very creative. So in a contact-free economy, there are efficiency gains. Again, as we've mentioned, there's a tremendous pressure to create efficiencies along the entire value chain of companies' business. And so let's start off with manufacturing, production, transport. We've already seen, and I'm surprised at the number of television ads that are already offering contact-free delivery. And I think that's a trend that we can expect to continue. You just basically get out your phone, tap the app, order your product, and then go and unlock it with your phone or with facial recognition or a combination of that or other biometrics. So that's going to be something that we can expect to see. And I also expect that drone delivery, contactless vehicles, all of those things are going to be pushed forward by companies in an effort to save costs as well as reduce the potential for human contagion and human contact. That is going to have a significant impact on our workforce, but for businesses, it'll help them protect their bottom line. Maintenance and repair, similarly, people can't enter offices, crowded offices and homes when they know that there are going to be a lot of people. And again, there's risk of contagion. So again, contact-free service delivery is going to be important. There, I think that instead of VR, we can expect AR to have a huge impact by basically holding up the phone and seeing or reflecting, say, the modem or a specific issue, troubleshooting an issue that you have by reading what the target object says and then getting feedback. That could be combined with either a chatbot, which is AI. You can talk to it interactively, and that person or that entity can talk you through it. So I think that that's a huge opportunity as well, is those sort of middle ground services. And finally, in real life interactions, everything from concerts. We had a huge scandal recently about the fact that people's concert tickets were not being refunded. Museums are being closed. I've written an article, I think it was about 2 years ago, about how the many ways that museums can innovate, and we've seen a lot of those things come to fruition in the in the interim. However, I believe that there's still a long way to go. So theater, concerts, museums, any sort of public events and engagements, and conferences, just meetings, $20 billion are expected to be lost this year because of the number of conferences around the world that are being canceled. Well, there are very impressive VR platforms, and we will be hosting some of those to show you how that you can have meetings in real life and feel as if you were there. To give you a sense of some of how these come to automation, AI, machine learning, all of these things can be used in tandem. And so you really get greater efficiency from working together. And this is probably why you need a virtualization strategy, but also a specialist who understands the entire arc across these different technologies, not just VR or AR or a particular silo. In developing a strategy, you really want to understand what your full menu options are so that you can get the greatest impact. Now, I am listing this per employee. This is a graphic by David Aboud at Accenture. And I like this very much because this is exactly where the pressure points are going to be. How to reduce the human impact is also going to mean more automation. It's just a fact. So automation and machinery are going to take over a lot of skills. Again, I've written an article about that. Please feel free to look at, will robots take over our jobs? And I think the answer is no. But you can expect to see in the short term a lot of efficiency gains to be had across the entire arc of a business's activities, and combining them proves most effective. So the talent wanted for 2020, this is the moment that many of you have been waiting for. So we're looking at automation, 3D content, integrated digital media, and we're going to need a lot of engineers for that. We're going to need computer programmers. We need people who can work on machine learning. If you don't already have a degree in this, take heart. There are a lot of free programs being taught now, right now. So if you go to Google, they have an expansive catalog of AI machine learning tools. Really familiarize yourself with those. They're fascinating. And Unity right now is teaching courses. So Unity and Unreal Engine are hot skills, highly in demand. And I imagine that you would have a lot of employment if you got those languages down and were able to create content, because there's a dearth of content. Now, 3D artists, creative technologists, UI, UX experts who can create assets, who can animate things. Now, those are going to be the magicians. In fact, I run the New York City Tech Creatives in New York City, and it's about 3,000 people. It's the largest on the East Coast, and I'm constantly amazed at the skills and the talent that we have. And they're the ones who understand the bridge between the technology itself and the creative potential of this technology. And I wouldn't underestimate the amount of the creativity, because translating technology from its specific design to other purposes is exactly what happened with the iPhone. I mean, who knew that the iPhone, which effectively was designed to make some calls and check the internet, would be able to, it would enable you to call up a perfect stranger to pick you up, pick up another perfect stranger, and transport you both safely to your end destination for the most part. So that was one of the wonders of the iPhone infrastructure or ecosystem, which then attracted so many other apps that have come to take part in our daily lives. So that's something that I think that we're going to see with these new platforms, is that they're going to take off unexpectedly. Now, last week we had somebody from Meta, that's META, Justin Baldinino, who created a platform called Unreality. And this Unreality is effectively going to be a new LinkedIn for creative technologists. And I couldn't be more excited about this, because I think that having access and being able to see the portfolios and really understanding who the talent is and being able to select them is going to help open up the bottleneck. Right now, it's going to be a couple of experts like myself and many of the guests that you see on my program. But at some point, it's going to be open. It's like LinkedIn, where you can really start opening up the conversation and looking to refine your overall strategy. But for now, as I said, these guys are going to be leading the way in terms of opening up that brand and leading new creative new creative solutions. So finally, we're going to talk about XR strategists. Again, the architects basically of your future reality for business. And a lot of them will be specialized in either VR or AR, and they're trainers or whatever. It is important to have access to somebody who understands the full breadth of different emerging technologies at their fingertips, but also has relationships with people who can enact these things. One of the things I find in the many conversations we've been having over the past few weeks, we ordinarily see each other always at the big conferences around the world, but recently we're all on the phone and at all different hours of the day and night because again, it's an international group. But just like this team of people, the top selections of our best providers are going to be tremendously busy. But that doesn't mean there aren't very talented AR developers or graphic designers who can create assets for 3D assets. So it's really a question of understanding, having the Rolodex to be able to enact anything, big or small, or create it from scratch and know that you can deliver it and they understand the time and the costs. Now, VR AR experts are going to be very helpful for designing training programs and implementing those, like the Walmart. I mean, that's a huge, huge piece of business. And having talented people to train up everybody on VR is very helpful. And you can imagine that that can be replicated across any number of different kinds of companies. And finally, whatever you do on YouTube can be done in VR. And in fact, we're going to really need content and we're going to need people to deliver that, whether it's education or skills training, or even if you've got if you're a sports fanatic, when you're in the headset, you could be on a bicycle. So think about Peloton, but being transported onto a headset. You can travel, you can learn something new, maybe you can learn a language, whatever it is. There's just not enough good content out there. So think about what you can create and put up in VR content. And platforms like Steam is for VR what Netflix is now for other entertainment, or Amazon. So we're going to see new platforms emerge, which gives you a big cutting edge, because if you're one of 10 apps available in your specific space, guess what? You're probably going to get a lot of traffic. The important thing is, whatever you do, take control. I know it's a very hard time to say that, but it's a good time to really take control. Make sure that you have solid advice. Get a plan in place. You need a virtualization strategy. I've created a white paper that maps out what that looks like, and it does give you a sense of the tools that are needed across different industries on the supporting graphic. So I encourage you to have a look at that. I'll be posting that shortly. And then once you understand what your needs are, you're going to need to work very closely with them, again, on realistic timing and implementation and budgeting. I know budgets are going to be tight, but of course, it's not a luxury now. It's a necessity. We have months, not years, to get this done and get it right. And finally, you learn to cut, paste, repeat, and then augment from the core critical, mission critical type of activities to things that would really facilitate coordination, collaboration, and creativity within your organization. So in summary, there are urgent pressures to economize. We have dramatic structural changes to society and to our economy, and that requires bold action. What we need to do is push for virtualization and use the resources that we have today. Be smart about it, make the right investments so that you're investing in things that are not only going to be useful in 3 years and 5 years, but really can set you on the right path for innovation, so that if there were ever a shock, or we find ourselves, unfortunately, back in an era of socialization and a contact-free society, that you are ready to continue and there's a business continuity and plan. After September 11th, they created a virtualization strategy for content, and that was the birth of the cloud, and that was the birth of software as a service. But nobody ever thought about a situation in which we as humans would need to be separated. But now that's a reality, so we have to step up to it. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult watching the news every day, but let's take heart in the things that we can do and get back to business as soon as possible. So wishing you well. I hope you stay tuned. Please add your feedback and comments, and watch us on Wednesdays when I invite the experts. Bye.